Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, whatever time of the day it is that you are viewing this, and welcome to our new e-learning platform here on Google Classroom. I hope everybody is doing well. I hope everyone is weathering these uncertain times. But regardless of what's happening out there, we're going to do the best we can to continue on in our lessons and in the class. So now we will do actually just that. So you can see on the screen here, we're going to continue with chapter 13, the human geography of Europe. And we're going to continue on to section 3, and we're going to talk about Northern Europe. We're going to continue our tour of Europe in the sense of our human geography. So, with that said, here are the objectives of the lessons. And it's going to be the same thing we've been doing in the past, just as if we were in the regular classroom. So theme 1, we're going to explain, the kind of like the early history of Northern Europe. Theme 2, we're going to talk about Northern Europe's influence on modern political systems. Theme 3, we're going to talk about the economy of Northern Europe. And finally, theme 4, we're going to talk a little bit about the culture of Northern Europe. So these 4 themes here are going to be the main points of the lesson. So, theme 1, the early people of Northern Europe, or the early history of Northern Europe. And just to clear some things up here, when we speak of Northern Europe, we're talking about the modern day United Kingdom, Ireland, and something that we call the Nordic countries. And if you can see on the PowerPoint, the map, the countries that are highlighted in yellow are the Nordic countries. So that includes Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and you can even see on the map they include Greenland in this. So basically, the early history of Northern Europe, begins with the use of the sea by the people. The Northern Europeans, you can say, or the Nordic people, you could say, were a seafaring people. And this is how they were actually able to come and actually do some damage in terms of conquering the European continent. In terms of the people, the ancient inhabitants of the United Kingdom were something that we call Celtic. And this was like, they were on the front line of the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire tried to extend itself into what we call England now, and they did, but were often resisted by these Celtic people. The late 700s, the Nordic people, who we might now know as Vikings, began conquests into Europe. They did it by sea, and they would attack coastal towns and they conquered parts of Britain, Iceland, and Greenland. I don't know if anybody has ever seen the show called Vikings. I think it's on Netflix, and it's a very good historical series on this time period and these Nordic people that expanded into England. So if you want to check that out on Netflix, it's a pretty cool series about what we're talking about here. So as I said before, these people were known as Vikings, and they even made a permanent settlement in France in the 700s, 800s. So they actually were doing some damage in the continental Europe, as we would say. So, and just to give you a visual, this map shows you where the Viking conquests and raids took place. So, as you can see, it's along the coastlines. So that's mainly because they were a seafaring people. Seafaring meaning, they boats and and doing things in the sea. So this gives you a little visual of what they did. However, the Nordic people never actually united and could form an established empire. So they remained divided, and that's why they couldn't expand further into Europe. However, as time went on, we'll skip a couple centuries here. Great Britain, as a country, out of these countries in Northern Europe, would come to build one of the greatest empires in history. And of course, that's the famous British Empire, upon which the sun never set, as they say. And over time, like I said, England would come to control its neighbors, and that's how the United Kingdom was formed in 1801. That's why they call it the United Kingdom, because England took over Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, these countries, and put them together into the United Kingdom. Great Britain, to establish this empire, used its geographic advantage and its status as a naval power to establish colonies all over the world. I mean, remember 1801, 1800s, this is the time before there's airplanes, so being an island, Great Britain was very, very protected and was able to ward off, invasions during times of war on continental Europe that was happening. So this is how they were able to build up a strong economy and a strong military power, especially their navy. And again, just another visual map. This gives you an idea of the size of the British Empire around 1870. It's huge. Every continent of the world, and if you notice on the map, they control key territories in terms of trading routes, particularly Egypt and India, and as you can see, South Africa. These are key places in the world where you can control trade. They also, the map doesn't show, but it wasn't until later, they also controlled Persia, what is now modern day Iran, and that's another territory to have if you're trying to control trade routes and things like that. So they were a very expansive empire, and they had a lot of territory. All right, so leaving the early history of empire in Northern Europe, or in the early people, we'll move on to Northern Europe's influence on modern political systems. And again, Great Britain has had the most impact on shaping the world's modern political systems. And they did that by not only developing and molding and spreading what we call a representative government. Another name you might have heard is like representative democracy. So this is Great Britain's great contribution to today's political systems, because many countries have tried to, what we can say, mimic, try to recreate what Britain did in terms of their government. And what happens in a representative government is that the country contains something called a parliament. I'm sure you've heard this word. Basically, almost every country in the world claims to have a parliament. And what a parliament is a representative lawmaking body whose members are elected or appointed. And this body, determines laws in the country. They can appoint, other members of the government. So they're very important in terms of being part of a country's government. It's the centerpiece of a lot of countries' government. And with the creation and development of the parliament in Great Britain, this is why you see the traditional monarchy become less powerful. So over time, the monarchs ceded more power to the parliament and made them obsolete. That's why today in Great Britain, Queen Elizabeth, yeah, she may make some statements and things like that, but at the end of the day, she's basically just a figurehead of the office of the English monarch. It's really the parliament and the prime minister who have the power and make the decisions, not the queen. And here's just another visual representation of how Parliament, became more powerful over time. You have the establishment of the English Parliament in the 1200s. Then you have something that was called the Magna Carta, which granted rights to nobles and it inspired other people to demand their rights. So this is, again, taking power from the monarch. And then you have the 1689 English Bill of Rights, which established elections and gave Parliament the power over the monarchy. That was the tipping point where you start to see the king or queen take a back seat to Parliament in terms of running the day-to-day operations of the country. And then, in the late 1990s, Nordic countries, you see more women participating in these parliaments. You see more have minority representation in these parliaments. So these representative parliaments have become, diverse bodies of governments. So you have a good mixture of people, especially in the Nordic countries. So with that, we can move on to theme 3, the economy of Northern Europe. And what's happening in Northern Europe today in terms of economy? Well, today, Northern Europe has one of the most highly developed and most diverse economies in the world. These countries, as we'll use the term that we used before in class, what we could say are global economic powerhouses. Like Great Britain was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution and has become a global economic leader. Countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they also have very strong economies and will be considered some of the most developed countries in the world. And why? Well, one, this region is very rich in natural resources, things like iron and ore. Having access to these types of resources were able to fuel the Industrial Revolution that started to take place in Great Britain. So maybe without those natural resources, the Industrial Revolution might have never happened. And also, their access to the sea. And so your countries are industrializing, you're getting all these goods. Of course, you need to, the market in your country is only so big and you need to start exporting these goods. Well, if you remember those maps that we looked at, look at where they are at geographically. They're right on the sea. So what better place to, deliver your goods to the world? So they benefited from this and was a major advantage for them to develop their industries. So Great Britain and Sweden, they produce things like cars, aerospace products, pharmaceuticals, things like this. Northern Europe is also a global leader in computer software and hardware. Places like Ireland, Glasgow, and Edinburgh, which are in Scotland, are like the Silicon Valley of Europe, as we'd say. Most members of Northern Europe are part of the European Union, which is an economic trading organization that includes most European countries. However, if you've seen in the news, Great Britain has just recently left the European Union. This has been known all over as Brexit. And this actually just recently happened. I think their last day in the Union was January 30th, 31st, something like that. Anyways, they've left the Union. So that covers the economy. So as for the culture of Northern Europe, we're here in theme 4 now. Ethnically, the people of Northern Europe have not been really diverse. However, of course, places like London or Copenhagen or Oslo, any urban center, of course, are going to have, diversity. But, outside of that, everyone is claiming the same kind of ethnicity. Most Nordic countries speak Germanic-rooted languages, which, with the Viking conquests, they spread their Germanic-rooted languages to a lot of other parts of Europe. And even today, some forms of a language called Gaelic survive in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. And in terms of religion, during the Reformation, most Northern European countries became and remain Protestant, except for Ireland, which is a predominantly Catholic country. So, religion, Protestant, with the exception of Ireland, which is Catholic. And that takes us to the end of my first attempt at giving you a video lesson. I hope the explanation was helpful. If you have any questions, it can be opened up for discussion on Google Classroom, or we can always WhatsApp. But I encourage you to use Google Classroom because it's amazing, and we should get to know how to use it. So if we have any questions, just try and direct them through there. Thank you, and I'll see you next lesson.